Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of How to Beat Your Addiction with your host, John Giordano. I'm the sidekick, Scott Jones, and we're coming to you talking about all things about addiction and all kinds of addiction, as a matter of fact. But one thing I want to tell you before we get started is if you like this program, or please, we encourage you to share it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and definitely like us and leave comments, too, because a lot of things that, John was thinking about shows all the time, and it would be great to have some comments about what they'd like to see.
Absolutely.
So questions or anything else. And of course, you can always go to johnjgiordano.com and reach
That's
John.
That's the letter J, not J-A-Y.
That's right. johnjgiordano.com. And you can leave any comments there as well, or get a hold of John through the website. But with that, of course, John and I, we got a great guest. We got Joshua Shea, who's coming from us from beautiful Maine, and he's excited about it. He's shaking his head. And we're going to be talking about, I guess we can call it an unpopular topic, which is porn addiction. And maybe it's kind of that topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. John, I mean, we've seen it for years, but it's not something people talk about openly, right?
Well, people don't understand there is such a thing as sex addiction. And that court case that's going on right now with that young man that killed these poor girls that in the massage parlors.
Yeah.
And he says, it wasn't about them being Asian. It was about he was trying to eliminate these spas so he doesn't go to them by killing people, which of course does not make sense.
Yeah.
And it's a serious addiction that people don't realize that, Josh will talk about it, how it destroys families, and how people even commit suicide because they can't deal with it anymore. So, Josh, why don't you talk about it? You're the expert on porn addiction, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is porn addiction, sex addiction, one of the symptoms is not being a murderer. So this guy who killed the Asian people, he's just a freaking psycho. So let's get that out of the way right away. He might be a sex addict. He might be a horrible sex addict. I don't know. I don't know the guy. And I said the similar thing when Tiger Woods came out as a sex addict. I don't know his life. He could be telling the truth, but that does not excuse the behavior on top of it. Go stand in front of any judge and say that you have ADD or ADHD or addiction or Asperger's or any type of mental or behavioral issue and see how light your sentence is. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to control your stuff. And if you can't control your stuff, there are still prices to pay. I think so many people, and we live in a very caring society, probably more caring and more understanding than we've ever had, even though it often doesn't feel that way. And I think that there are a lot of people who give a lot of leeway for maladaptive behaviors within addiction. And while there is some gray area that you can, give people a little bit of push or pull, murder is not one of them. So, that's to me, that's off the table. This dude is just a psycho or schizo or I don't know. I don't want to offend anybody who walks around and is a, closet murderer and keeps their crap together. So good job. Don't murder anyone. But it's not sex addiction. Let's I don't want.
Why don't we define sex addiction? Because many people don't understand.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people, when they hear sex addiction, think intercourse addiction. And I don't necessarily like that as the term. What I think that sex addiction should be similar to drug addiction, where it's an umbrella term. And it should be called, unhealthy sexuality addiction, because within this, you do have intercourse, you do have pornography, but you also have other little things like exhibitionism, like voyeurism. These are unhealthy sexual addictions as well. One of the men who I met in treatment, his biggest issue was that, he would masturbate in his truck. He was actually a professional athlete. I won't obviously say who, but he was kindly retired from his organization several years ago when I was in treatment. And he kept getting caught by people in his truck after games masturbating. Now, that's an unhealthy sexual addiction. Doesn't have to do with intercourse, doesn't have to do with porn. So, again, calling it just sex addiction, I think sometimes mainstream America doesn't understand that. So, I hope that as this becomes more understood, that we have these branches. Opiate addiction is different than benzos addiction. And you have these different classifications that come with different symptoms, that come with different behaviors. And I think it's important for people to realize that, you can use sex addiction as a catch-all term, but it does vary from person to person quite a bit.
Well, I'm glad you said all that. And what we call it is addictions. We call it RDS, reward deficiency syndrome, when you want to go into the neurology of addiction. There's a lack of dopamine and serotonin. And when people are deficient in that, they look to medicate.
Right.
So what happens also, we call addiction when you continue to use a substance or a behavior in spite of adverse consequences. I think we could call that addiction.
Oh, absolutely. And when people ask me, they say, well, my husband or my boyfriend looks at porn once in a while, because I do a lot of coaching. I do a lot of coaching with the wives of porn addicts, and I do a lot of coaching with women who simply have betrayal trauma. And one of the most interesting things is that there are a lot of women who will come to me and say, I've told him many times not to watch porn, and I've caught him in the last 5, I probably catch him once or twice a year watching porn. And I have to explain, that doesn't make him a porn addict necessarily. That makes him a bad partner, but that doesn't necessarily make him a porn addict, because porn addiction does not take place between the legs. It takes place between the ears, where all addiction takes place.
Well, we're talking about, but some people look at porn, even couples look at porn, and they look at it to stimulate their sexual relationship too. So, what about
They do, but the statistics show, it's one thing to enjoy watching it prior to your relationship. It's one thing to be on the same page with it as you enter the relationship. Like I say, my crusade is not necessarily against porn, because I could bang my head against a wall and get more results. We're not going to outlaw porn ever. It's been around since the dawn of time. So that's kind of a silly crusade to fight. What I fight is unhealthy sexuality. And what more couples need to recognize, couples who are married and introduce pornography to their marriage, they have a divorce rate that's 3 times higher than that of people who don't introduce pornography to their marriage later on.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because there are already problems and that they are looking for quick fixes. I don't necessarily think that if you look at porn, you're destined to divorce, but I think you're already on the road to trouble. And I'll tell you, I have probably read at this point over 100 academic papers, studies, reports about pornography, whether it's marriage, whether it's talking to your kids, whether it's effects on society. I have never read a single report where the conclusion is pornography is good or healthy. There are people who can use it and not develop problems. Like, as I'm sure you both know, I was also an alcoholic. I can't drink normally, but I still watch my wife have 1, maybe 2 glasses of wine a week, and it's not a problem. Or I can go to a casino and I can walk away fine, no problem. I don't have the gambling gene, but that's not always possible. So I feel my real mission is to get people to talk about pornography, to talk about pornography use, because almost all of us are using it. even if we don't want to talk about it, statistics very clearly, almost all of us are using it. We need to recognize that, not be embarrassed by that, and then recognize that with the explosion of the internet over the last 20 years, that it's a different world than the one that, the three of us grew up in, and that we need to address the next generations differently. And it sucks in 2021. We have to talk about pornography to children, but times change. It's not 1958 anymore. We don't have to have air raid drills. So, times change, you adjust. And we're now in a point where we need to, as parents, as society, as teachers, as schools, we need to, at a very age appropriate, at a very basic level, talk about the fact that pornography does have a dark side, does have an addictive side, and kids are going to do what kids do, adults are going to do what adults do, but nobody who picks up smoking these days over the age of 12 doesn't know that it's harmful. Everybody knows it's harmful, even if you start. That's where we need to get with pornography. And I'm sure we'll see some of the statistics fall, much like we've seen the smoking statistics fall over the last 50 years.
Porn addiction usually winds up in people in isolation.
Oh, absolutely.
Where they're embarrassed or ashamed to look at it. Or they're trying to stimulate the relationship. And what it does is, I believe, it starts to kill the intimacy between couples, which is, I think that's what causes a big problem also.
I disagree with you there, John. I think that that's an excuse, but I think it has very little to do with couples. It has very little to do with couples.
I'm not saying as an excuse. Nothing's an excuse because you're responsible for whatever you do anyway. So what I'm saying is that if you want to take it a little deeper, okay, there's something missing. If it's in relationships we're talking about, if it's up by yourself, it's a different ballgame. But if you're in a relationship and you're trying to spruce it up, I don't think that's a good way of doing it.
No.
Okay, because actually you're looking at another woman, and I don't think women would appreciate that. Okay, so that's what I mean by the intimacy starts to disappear. So you get what I mean now? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, because you've got to feed that beast. And that's the thing is that, a lot of wives who I deal with and girlfriends as well, they wonder what they did wrong. And I explain, for instance, my situation where, I started as a porn addict around 12, 13 years old. I met my wife just before my 26th birthday. I was a porn addict for 14 years before I met her. How much could she really have to do with it? It was already there. I already knew how to hide it. I hid it well from her for years. It's one of these things where you think the partner thinks that they're part of the problem. But as you gentlemen know, look at people who are addicts of any other shape or size, and the sex drive drops. Ask a heroin addict how much sex they want to have. They don't have a sex drive. And that's what happens in addiction. But because porn addiction, sex addiction so closely involves nudity, sexual activity, orgasm, it becomes all intertwined. When I was an addict, up until the last probably year, I had a fairly regular sex life with my wife because what I got out of sex with my wife was intimacy. It was the human touch. It was love. That's not what I was looking for with porn. I didn't need any of those things with porn. My porn addiction was about control and power. And that's not what I looked for when I was in bed with my wife. So, it really did, even though there was naked people, even though there was an orgasm, they are two very separate things. And unless you are an addict or have been through it, I think a lot of wives and partners confuse the two things and don't recognize that.
Job. Okay, it's all about
medicine.
Yourself. It has nothing to do with anybody else.
Right.
If the wife isn't as sexual as you would like it to be, okay, that has nothing to do with her. It has to do with yourself. Okay,
right.
So we look for these outside stimulations like that. What it does, it destroys what, it's like the fix is worse than what's going on,
Right.
So if you move one piece, you break 9 other pieces.
If I can interrupt you guys for one second, I want to make sure that we make something very clear. This is not reserved solely for men, although it is the majority of the population of sex addicts are male, and we know that statistically. But there's a great many female. I want to make sure we make that clear because we've been saying wives and different things.
Right.
There's a great many females who have sexual addictions. It may not look the same, but they are addictions just as well. Isn't that right, Josh?
Absolutely. Straight white females are the number one growing demographic for pornography addiction. Number one growing demographic easily. And when you look at somebody with a porn addiction who then takes it outside of a relationship, and there is infidelity, men do this about 15% of the time. Women do it 80% of the time.
Really?
And we can debate that, well, women can get laid whenever they want, so it's a lot easier. We can say that women are about feeling and touch more than men are, but it's a statistic that blows my mind away still, that 4 out of 5 women who go down the porn addiction road end up in a situation of infidelity. And like I said, it's growing more than ever.
Why do you think that is?
I think it has to do with needing a level of intimacy when it comes to their unhealthy sexual behavior. I think that men are more visual, women are more touch. You know, it is I do believe in the men are from Mars, women are from Venus ideas. There are some things that are just chemically and physiologically different with us. And I think that women, again, have an easier time of having sex if they go to a bar and getting picked up or picking up a guy. So I think that plays into the power aspect of it. And with a lot of sexual addictions, you like mine, you do hear a lot about power and control. So if a woman is out there and she decides that tonight is a night she's going to pick a guy up, it's very empowering to do that. It feels good to do that. That's escalating to do that. That's, you know, to me, those are probably the reasons why it happens.
Also low self-esteem also. And then it's like, like eating disorders. It's not about food, it's about control.
Right.
So it's the same thing about that. So a woman, maybe in her relationship, she has, she's dominated by the male, and she can go out and she could be the one that's dominating and in control. It goes so many different levels because everybody's different, of course,
Right.
But I was surprised when you told me that big of a percentage about women.
Yeah, no, it's
interesting.
It's crazy, and it's, you're seeing such a growth. I think that's my Christmas present on my shoulder. That's one of the many cats that we have here. We have 4 cats, 3 dogs, and so they're always making cameos.
So you got problems way beyond everything else.
Oh, although I will say I never allowed my family to have a pet when I was in my addictions, and I got to say, for recovery, getting a pet was absolutely great, and we just keep adding to the zoo we have here, and I love them so much, and there's an emotional thing there that I think maybe it's empathy or sympathy, or I don't know, but in taking care of these animals, I take care of them better than I took care of my family 10 years ago. It took me a long time to learn how to do that. So I've been preaching on my Instagram and other places, because we now actually foster puppies, and we bring them into the house usually once a month for a week or so. And pets are amazing for recovery, any kind you need.
Josh, to change the conversation for a second, is our audience, what can we tell them some of the strategies they can use to help them, with their addiction with porn, once they realize they have one?
Well, like any other addiction, if you've reached that point, you're not a casual user anymore. This is affecting your life. You need to make the decision that you're going to be proactive in changing things. And the first thing that I would say is to try to make it more difficult for yourself to look at porn. I don't think that this is a long-term solution, but in the short term, do something where you put the computer not next to your bed or someplace different. You've got to mix up your routine while you go get help. I think that's the best thing at home when you're alone. Second best thing to do, in my opinion, is to talk to somebody who has been a porn addict and is in some level of recovery. If you can't find a porn addict, find a different kind of addict, because we all have a lot of similar things going on. But I will tell you, when I was in rehab, when I went to my first group therapy outside of rehab, some of the most comforting things you can hear are that somebody else had this problem. Somebody else knows what you went through. When I interview when I coach porn addicts for the first time, I let them know that, I don't care what you looked at. I probably looked at it too, and I probably looked at even worse. And I don't, you're cool with me. I know you're not the porn you look at. I know it escalates. I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to embarrass you. You looked at porn. So did I. Now let's talk about why. And it's amazing how many people you almost can see them just go, and they relax, because for the first time in their lives, 10, 20, 30 years, for the first time in their lives, they're able to talk openly about this secret problem. So I absolutely urge, go to therapy, change your things around. There's a whole strategy to go, but very early on, talk to somebody. Just unburden yourself. And it's, like I said, I don't know if it's the same with certain other drugs. I never had this really with alcohol, but with pornography, boom, 1,000 pounds. And I've seen it so many times. It is so secretive. I make a joke sometimes that when I first went into rehab for alcoholism, and when you tell people you're going into rehab for alcoholism, they shake your hand, they pat you on the back, they call you a hero. And when you go to rehab for porn addiction, they go like this and ask where the hand sanitizer is, because there's still so much stigma around it. Yeah. Even though that person who does that probably is masturbating to porn that night, they still do that. And that's where we are in society. And if you have the issue, talk to somebody, talk to a therapist who knows something about addiction, because a lot of therapists are not veterinarians. People don't realize that. They can't fix everything. They have specialty areas. Find somebody who knows about addiction, find a coach who knows about addiction, find somebody who's been through the programs, and then look at all the different ways that you can go on that journey, whether it's 12 steps, whatever it is.
It's been my experience. And we have sex addicts, especially cocaine addicts, become sex addicts also. What my experience has been, a lot of the people that become porn or sex addicts were molested early on. They had some kind of a trauma early on. And it's like unbelievable. Everybody I speak to with that, they had molested when they were young. And I don't know how that plays, but it plays right into this whole thing about sex addiction and porn addiction and everything like that.
Well, Dr. Patrick Carnes is kind of the godfather in this area, and he did a groundbreaking study. It was one of the first, and it's now 20 plus years old, so the statistics may be a little different. But he basically found out, he interviewed thousands of men, sex porn addicts. He found out that roughly 70% of the men who have sex or porn addiction have some kind of physical abuse in their background. Roughly 80% have some kind of sexual abuse, and over 90% have some kind of emotional or mental abuse. And as you guys all know, what grows out of, abuse is trauma. And if that trauma is untreated, well, it often evolves into addiction. So people, want to soothe themselves, want to deal with the problems. I was both mentally and or emotionally and sexually abused at the hands of a babysitter when I was a very young kid. And when I look at my addictions, I know that the alcoholism was about numbing. It was just about dulling those nerve endings and being able to chill out. But the porn was about control and power, because when I was a little kid there, I had to cede my control and my power. I saw horrible things happen to children. There were horrible things that happened to me. And I think that I subconsciously or maybe consciously made a promise to myself that I would not be in those situations. So if you look at my life, I've owned my own companies. I've worked for myself. I do not like other people to be in control of me. And when you look at those times in my life when I didn't have as much control, that's when you see the pornography spike. Because if you think about it, that person on the page, that person on the computer screen, they can't say no to you. If I want a beautiful blonde girl one day, she's not saying no. If I want a beautiful brunette the next day, she's not saying no. And nobody on that computer screen can nag you and say, it's time to take out the trash, or you didn't do a good job at your work today. When you are in front of that computer screen looking at pornography, you are the king of your fantasy universe. Nobody says no. And if you don't like what you're looking at, you skip to something else. You don't like that, you skip to something else. Unfortunately, with addiction, you get stories of guys 3, 4, 5 hours in front of the computer searching for that perfect piece of porn that tickles them in the brain that can lead to the orgasm, because the orgasm is kind of like a checkered flag in auto racing. It lets you know that you're done. That's really what it serves, the purpose it serves when you're having one of those porn sessions. And I've talked to men who, thankfully I didn't enter this area, but who would literally masturbate themselves to injury 6, 8, 10 hours a day, where they would have to take days off to literally heal because
I have like that. Yeah.
They hurt themselves. And some people laugh at that. And when I first heard it, I was like, I can't believe that. But that is the depth that some people can get to. And think about that shame, walking around, trying to have a job, trying to have a life, knowing that, your private parts are rubbed raw. That's going to carry shame. That's going to carry embarrassment with it.
My experience with that is that they're trying to medicate these feelings they don't want to deal with. So what happens is after they climax, all of a sudden they feel relieved. But then, of course, it comes back because you're not going to the original cause of what's happening.
Right.
So it's the same thing as taking a pill, taking a needle, or masturbating. People don't realize there's an interconnection with all this stuff. What you're doing is medicating these emotions and these feelings that are causing this inner stress, this shame, this guilt, low self-esteem, all the stuff that goes with this stuff. And what happens is after you climax, you feel like, it's done. And then all of a sudden, all that stuff comes rushing back in later on, and you do it again and again and again and again.
Or you're like, how did the 30 minutes, I sat down at midnight to look at pornography, and now it's 3:30 in the morning. How did that happen? And I have to be up at 6:30 to get the kids to school. And then I have to run a company where I've got, 8 employees who are all expecting me to be there at 7. And I am exhausted, but I have to do this. This is where you talk about addictive behavior getting in the way. It's not that I got only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. It's that the next day I did a much worse job at my work. My work suffered because I was in a position of power, because I was the publisher of this magazine I operated. Everybody else's work suffered. The overall magazine suffered. That's where you see the results of this happening. My kids didn't get a father who was 100% attentive. My wife didn't get a husband that way because pornography affected every aspect of my life. Even if I hadn't looked at it for 12 hours, even if I hadn't had a drink in 2 days, it was probably negatively affecting my life in some way in whatever moment you go back to.
If I could throw something in here, gentlemen, just because I want to make sure we get to this before we have to close the show. I think it's important for people to understand. I think the scary part is for people with sexual addictions, porn addictions, is now I can't have sex at all. I have to be abstinent. And that's not healthy either. So,
no,
maybe both of you can address this. It's like, listen, an alcoholic, I never have to pick up another drink. A drug addict, I don't have to pick up heroin and do it to keep my sanity. I could be sane without it. But I do need intimacy in my life, and I do need those kind of relationships. How do you find that balance? And isn't that kind of scary? Somebody who's coming out of a porn addiction, all of a sudden they're standing and they're having an intimate relationship with a woman. How hard is that?
Well, in my experience, go ahead, John.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, John.
Yeah, my experience is that what happens is sometimes they can't get stimulated to have sex because they wind up, their penises don't work because it's all like you said, between your ears, and they're not excited enough to even have sex with their wife or their girlfriend because they needed that stimulation with the porn or with a magazine, which he used to be, dating herself. All right. This is also a thing for them because they don't know how to act without it. Just like with drugs, for me, my life was completely different when I was on drugs than what it is like now. So it's like you got to give time if you want to change things.
Absolutely.
You got to go to therapy. You got to go with somebody. For me personally, I know that people say, well, therapists that don't have to be an addict to understand addiction. When you live it, it's a whole different ballgame than when you view it. It's like reading about how to play football and you're standing on the sidelines. It's completely different than getting into the game and playing on the field. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and I really believe that there is a difference because then you can make that connection. It's a rapport that you cannot get from a book.
No, absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of when I deal with the partners of porn addicts, especially, I have found a lot of them love to talk to me because I can translate what the addict is saying. Sometimes the addict says something and they don't believe them, and the addict is telling the truth. Like the addict is saying, "I love you." The addict does love them. The addict is just ruled by their addiction, and
Right.
that love will never be stronger than the addiction until they get some help. And it's interesting you mentioned the the not being able to participate in sex because of the porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I think that porn-induced erectile dysfunction is what we need to be telling every 13 and 14-year-old boy about out there. Because and this is not scaring them, but I worked with a couple, one of the first couples I ever worked with about 2 years ago. The guy was 22, the girl was 20. He had essentially fried his brain on porn to the point that they couldn't have regular sex. For them to have sex, they had to bring a laptop or a phone into the bedroom and porn had to be playing. And she got sick. She was a nursing student. She understood addiction. She was trying to help him. But she eventually got sick of this. She figured out another way to do things. He would sit in the bedroom looking at their laptop. She would be with her phone in the living room. And they would be sexting back and forth with each other because to his mind, that was pornography since it appeared on a screen. And just at the point where he was about to have an orgasm, he would yell out to her and she would come running into the room and they would finish like quote unquote normal people. But if you think about that, if that's the way that they have to move forward, they can't conceive a child without pornography playing in the room. And she's a saint of a girl. I haven't talked to them about a year, but she was a saint of a girl who a lot of women would not put up with this. And 14-year-old boys, I don't believe they want to be porn addicts. I believe they want girlfriends and they want to have sex. But they'll take what they can get when they're 14 because statistically, sex is not going to happen for another 2, 3, 4 years. So they'll take what they can, perhaps develop an addiction because there's no education around it. Let's tell them, listen, there's a percentage of guys who, when they do this, they go down this road. And like you said, John, essentially their penises stop working. If you think you're going to get a girl with a broken penis, you're not going to. So think about the porn when you look at it. Think about how much you look at it. Think about why you look at it. And that's what we need to tell our boys just entering puberty. Your penis can break, so be careful. And is it scaring them? Perhaps, but it's scaring them with the truth.
But there is a point where there is a reversal. I mean, there can be a reversal where you can assume more of a normal sexuality
absolutely
after a period of time. I just want to I don't want people to think
communication.
Listen, I've gone so far I can't fix it anyway.
No, exactly. Communication with your partner is number one. You need to be on the same page. Healthy sexuality only exists when you're on the same page, and that's scary for a lot of people. Those conversations with my wife about healthy and unhealthy sexuality were among the scariest because I never had deep, intimate talks with her about sex, but I needed to do that as part of my recovery. And I think it's also a bit like, and I have bipolar disorder as well, every 4 or 5 years I have to change up the meds because they kind of just, I get used to them. And there's this adjustment period that can sometimes really suck, where you have side effects and all of a sudden everything you're eating tastes like metal, or your ears are ringing and you know that's not the thing for you, so you have to move things around. After you get out of treatment, when you start to come back into this world of hopefully healthy sexuality, you don't cannonball into the pool. You walk in slowly. Start with some light touching. Start with some light kissing. Work on the intimacy. Work on that side of things. The orgasm will come, and it'll eventually happen. It will. It's just a balancing act, and it's a matter of getting there. You're not going to get over any addiction overnight, so you're not going to heal overnight. It's a process, and it will be a process that way. But your partner will probably be thrilled that you're talking. Your partner will be thrilled that you're specifically thinking, excuse me, about intimacy. That's what has to happen. And is it uncomfortable? Sure, it's uncomfortable. But I can tell you 7 years later, I've got the best marriage and the best life that I ever had because I walked through all that stuff to get there.
Because, one of the reasons is what you're saying is 100% true, because you became vulnerable.
Yes, that's tough.
Talk to your wife in a way that you would just be honest and vulnerable and really want to help. And this way they can help you, because as long as when they start understanding, they can help you when you go down and you're low. You're feeling low, so they can talk with you because you don't feel uncomfortable talking about it because you already did. So
exactly,
it's like intimacy is into me, you see.
Right.
And that's what it's really about.
And the thing is, I should be able to say to my wife, hey, let's bring 3 girls to bed. Or, hey, let's have anal sex. Or, hey, let's go have sex in an elevator. And she should be able to say to me, no, I'm not interested in any of that stuff. And then I go, okay, that crosses your boundaries. We're not going to do any of that stuff. As an individual, maybe I do want to do all that stuff. But as a couple, as a sexually healthy couple, we don't. And maybe she says, I want to tie you up, or I want to play with food while we have sex. And I say, no, I'm not into that. Well, we're not going to do that because those are my boundaries. And having those conversations makes it so much better. And I think especially young men need to understand that pornography is not real. It's fiction. It's not a documentary about having sex. It's not a reality show about having sex. It is pure fiction. 3 ways happen less than 20% of the time in a woman's life. Anal sex happens less than 15% of the time in a woman's life. If you watched porn, you'd think that 100% of guys do this and 99% of girls do this. It's not real, and that's the other thing that we need to continue to say.
Just to end it, I guess, because we're getting soon, just to top it off, this way the woman doesn't feel it's like I'm less than, and maybe I'm not enough for him. That's why he's going outside and looking at this porn and stuff like that. Maybe I'm not having sex right with him. And they bring up all the insecurities of the other partner.
Right.
And once you verbalize and explain, look, it has nothing to do with you. This is me in my head. Okay, it makes and you get closer with that human being, that wife or that relationship, because of your vulnerability, because you open up and you say, and it's not about her, it's about us.
Yeah, gentlemen, just for some final thoughts real quick. Somebody was saying the other day, I actually heard them say that thanks to the internet, I've seen more naked women than all of my ancestors combined in my lifetime. Because of the internet, it's all right there. Now, you said we need to be able to talk about this more. Josh, you were talking about we need to be able to talk about this. How do we reach that point? Or how do we have those conversations in a healthy way? Not just about when we're dealing with somebody who does have a porn addiction, but just as a culture and a society who is the most sexually repressed and yet sexually explicit society on the planet.
Absolutely.
We've got everything, but we don't talk about anything. How do we start having those conversations so that it can be like the alcoholism? I'm going to get treatment, people pat you on the back. How do we have those conversations? Where does that start? Like in families or even among friends? How do you do those?
I think the safest way to start it, okay, because most people don't understand that emotional roller coaster ride that addicts go through, is with a third party, with a therapist. That's the best way, I believe, to open it up so you're in a more safer environment, and they can intervene, when it gets too far left or too far right. I think that would be the best way, not to just blurt it out to your wife. I don't think that would be a good idea, because they're going to go, they won't understand.
Right. I also think society in general needs to become more educated. My most recent book I wrote that came out last summer was specifically about how the world of online pornography changed in the first 3-4 months of the pandemic, because it was radically different. And I'll tell you, there's one porn site that most people over 35 years old have never heard of, and I won't mention it, but most people over 35 years old have never heard of this site. For the under 35 crowd that does not know a world before the internet, this is an everyday part of their culture. And on this site is almost like Facebook meets Etsy for pornography. You start a page, you charge people to come to your page, then you charge them even extra to see exclusive pictures or videos or whatnot. There were 300,000 people worldwide who were on this site on January 1st, 2020. On January 1st, 2021, it was estimated just on this one site that there was between 1.3 and 1.5 million people creating pornography. So when you talk about the legacy of the pandemic, yes, a lot of people looked at porn during it. I think that the pandemic, because when I interviewed these people, they talked about, yes, they liked the money, and I talked about a dozen different models, but it was scary that a lot of the new models were telling me, I can't get a boyfriend in real life, and all of a sudden I've got men proposing marriage all over the place. Or a guy will be like, I work out real hard, nobody says anything, but I take my shirt off on here, and I've got girls telling me I'm the greatest looking guy they've ever seen. And what are they getting out of this? They're getting a dopamine rush, they're getting an oxytocin rush, they're getting the serotonin rush. They're getting the exact same thing that people who look at pornography as an addict get out of it. And what I think in the long term is we are going to remember this pandemic as not just a time when pornography addiction exploded on the consumer side. I think we learned there's another side to the coin, and that pornography addiction, we're going to be seeing it more and more over the next several years when it comes to people who produce it at home, a DIY kind of thing.
Yeah, they're making a lot of money too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's intoxicating. It's absolutely intoxicating.
We're out of time.
Yeah. I mean, we covered so much, and we probably should revisit this several times, obviously. This is a conversation we need to keep having about sexual addiction, including porn addiction and other things. But learn. If you heard something and you want to learn more, listen, the internet's great for that. You can actually learn things on the internet. Don't just use it for porn, but, obviously go on there and learn about this stuff, and have these conversations out in the open. And hopefully one day it'll be normalized enough so that if somebody does start to have a problem, they don't have to feel shameful, and they can go for help before they destroy their relationships, their lives, their careers, and their own health. And I hope that's what we all hope for, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
I want to thank our guest, Joshua Shea. And if you want to know more, it's P Addict Recovery. It's on the screen, so you can check it out, paddictrecovery.com. And you can get access to his materials, more about him. Reach him, obviously, and take a look at some of his publications. You got several books, correct?
Yes, I do. And you can connect with me pretty much any way and get any material that I've ever produced on there. And if you want to know more about coaching, that's good that way as well.
Excellent. And of course, if you want to know more about John Giordano, go to johnjgiordano.com. It's right on the screen. Yes.
Oh, you got the book.
Good man. Pick up his latest book. It'll show you how to get it. The Kid from the South Bronx Who Never Gave Up.
I know how payola works.
Well, now I feel bad we didn't hold up his book. Here, I'll draw a picture real quick. But yeah, johnjgiordano.com. And remind you again, if you like How to Beat Your Addictions right here with John Giordano, make sure that you like this, you subscribe, and you share it with your friends. And let's get these conversations out there, whether it's alcoholism, drug addiction, food addiction, porn addiction, whatever it might be. The best way to defeat any of these things is to bring it to the light of day, and it can't be done in a dark room and in a closet of shame. So we got to bring it out.
That's what these podcasts are about. So
exactly.
You got to do a comment, do a like, and follow us. This information needs to get, we have people like Josh on it that can really give you some really good information, and all of the other guests and myself involved, and Scott, please follow us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Josh, thanks again.
Josh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Stay warm up there in Maine. I know there's another cold streak coming, so good luck.
I'm sure there is. There always is.
Take care, my friend. John, once again, thank you very much, brother.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, and we'll catch you next time right here on How to Beat Your Addiction.